So, with the Great Pyramid, what I think was going on conceptually, this is a very unique pyramid, by the way. There is no other pyramid like this in its interior design. So whoever built it had some very specific purpose in mind. And I think what was going on is that this was a meteorite chamber, and the iron, which they regarded as the seed of creation, the seed of the creator God, or the material of creation, was being blasted up out of the ground, and it's installed in this chamber. And the reason these hollow shafts were built was perhaps something to do with this iron being blasted up into the sky to form the stars and the sun and the moon. A slight amendment to, an improvement perhaps to that schematic diagram is this one, where I've labelled the shafts sound as well as the seed. So as well as the seed of the creator God being ejaculated up into the sky, also possibly the idea of sound being emitted from the king's chamber. Now this is a subject I don't have time to go into today, but I have come to the belief that the king's chamber was some kind of experiment in acoustics. I know many other researchers have come to a similar conclusion. My idea is that these hollow shafts were designed in order that low-frequency sound could be broadcast to the outside world. And my explanation for that is, again, they were trying to reenact this creation myth. If you look in the pyramid text where the pharaoh is reenacting the creation, sound is very important. We have the creator God speaking, the gods shout, and the king, when he ascends to the sky, he ascends amidst an earthquake with lots of rumbling and quaking of the earth. So this would definitely be consistent with a reenactment of the creation myth. But the big question is how you got this chamber to resonate and create low-frequency sound waves. And I won't bore you with the details for that, but all I will say is read chapter 7 of my book, Pyramid of Secrets, and see what you make of it. Incidentally, many of you might have heard that idea because that was picked up when I published the book by the Daily Mail. They published a 2-page article about this, and then I appeared on the Richard and Judy show talking about this idea of sound being broadcast from the pyramid. Did anybody see that? That was the famous episode where Richard was going on and on about why a certain species of shark had 2 willies. And if you want to know the answer to that, ask me afterwards. Anyway, I digress. So here we have the Great Pyramid as we know it today. And I want to just bring you back to this overview of the Great Pyramid and ask the question, if this was a meteorite chamber, just give me some mileage with this and let's see where this takes us. If this was a meteorite chamber and this whole pyramid is a simulacrum of the creation myth, which I believe it was. I believe it was actually a kind of hieroglyph, a picture in stone of a conceptualized moment of creation when the primeval ocean gave rise to matter and spirit prior to the creation of the cosmos that we know today, that the Egyptians knew. This is a moment frozen in time at the very, very beginning of creation. That's what I think it signifies symbolically. Anyway, if that's the meteorite chamber, the material of creation is being blasted up toward the sky. What about these other chambers? What was the purpose of the Queen's chamber or the subterranean chamber? Well, now we are really getting into unexplored territory because nobody has really looked at the pyramid in this way before. But let's think about the tomb. Let's just go a little way with the Egyptologists and say, well, what if this was built partly as a tomb? Not wholly as a tomb as they believe, but maybe partly as a tomb. Where would that tomb be? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the king was supposed to be buried in the ground to become at one with Osiris, the body to earth, the spirit to the sky. The most likely contenders for the burial, you would think, would be the subterranean chamber and perhaps this small cave, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, small cave here, which we'll come back to later. First, let me just explore another possibility, which is the Queen's Chamber. This is obviously not as high as the King's Chamber, which is 140 feet high. This is more like 50 or 60 feet above ground level. And the Egyptians, they did have a little bit of, let's call it poetic license in the placement of pyramid chambers. So, for instance, when you go forward in time to the 5th and 6th dynasties, you find that they placed underground two chambers, one called the Duat chamber, one called the Akhet chamber. Strictly speaking, that Akhet chamber should be above ground level. But in that dynasty, certainly they felt able to use a bit of poetic license and bring the Akhet chamber down into the ground. And the whole thing is a kind of fluid representation of different moments of creation. So they can perhaps get away with it a little bit. So it is just possible at a pinch that the Queen's Chamber might have been the tomb. So let's take a quick look at this, one of these secret chambers. It was hidden beneath a slab of stone 17 feet long, and it spanned, you can see the resting point here, the lip on which that slab sat, completely obscured the passageway to the Queen's Chamber, which is through here. So this passageway is about 109 feet long. After 109 feet, there is a drop in the floor level for the last 18 or so feet. So we end up with quite a high doorway here, leading into the Queen's Chamber. As we come into the Queen's Chamber, we can see the main feature is this corbelled niche, which is 15.5 feet high. Now, this, incidentally, is a hieroglyph or pictogram. We know this because this corbelling can have no structural purpose. In this particular placement in this chamber, it is not for the purpose of weight relief from masonry above. It is placed in the east wall of the Queen's Chamber purely for some kind of symbolic reason. And according to my research, this is a hieroglyph which meant something like to ascend or to become high. So this is perhaps an interesting symbol for you to look out for in your crop circle studies. Has anybody come across this symbol in crop circle research? Something to look out for, perhaps. To become high or to ascend. The idea of being that at the time of creation, things were lifted up from the primeval world up to create the sky, the sun, the moon and the stars. And the king, in reenactment of that, would ascend up to the sky. So there we have the niche. This is completely unique, by the way. We know of nothing like this in any other pyramid or tomb in Egypt. One can only speculate about what it contained. And there's an interesting tunnel behind it, which might have been a secret passageway too. The floor of the chamber, by the way, is completely rough. It looks as if the chamber originally had some kind of attractive floor stones, which an intruder decided to remove because they were valuable. And there is a report by an Arab writer called Edrisi, I think he is 12th century AD or thereabouts, a report that he found an empty sarcophagus in this chamber. That is not confirmed. There is no other writer that would confirm that. But in other respects, Edrisi's account is reliable. So possibly he did see a sarcophagus. Maybe it was made of limestone or alabaster. It could have been broken up and removed from the chamber. So possibly this could have been a tomb for the builder of the pyramid. Let's take a look now at the other major feature of the Queen's Chamber, which is a pair of air shafts, so-called air shafts. They're not really air shafts. I shouldn't call them air shafts because they do not connect to the outside of the pyramid, and they were originally sealed at their apertures in the chamber, as we'll see now. That's the shaft in the south wall, which the Gantenbrink robot went up in 1993. This is the other shaft in the north wall. You can see here how the entrance, the aperture to it, is partly covered by stone. And if we look at a close-up picture, there we can see very clearly how it was originally sealed by about 5 inches of masonry. Isn't it strange why the builders would have left that seal intact and not cut through those shafts? Very strange indeed. And one thing that struck me about a year ago, I was thinking about these shafts. I was in communication with an Egyptologist, and we were batting some ideas around, and I suddenly realised about these shafts. They must be very important because they dictate the axis of the similar shafts in the King's Chamber higher up the pyramid. Those King's Chamber shafts are a bit of a puzzle because they're not on the centre axis of the pyramid, they're not on the centre axis of the King's Chamber, they're offset for no reason that I ever read anywhere. And then it just dawned on me one day that their axis is the same axis as these shafts in the Queen's Chamber. So the Queen's Chamber shafts dictated to the builders how they would build those shafts higher up. So that's quite an interesting point. But why they would have sealed these shafts like this, that is a real mystery. One idea which I put forward in my book Pyramid of Secrets is that perhaps all of the chambers and passageways of this pyramid were sealed up like a kind of capsule, like a time capsule. And these chambers would have contained the sacred relics of the builders, perhaps sacred writings and other relics that they wanted kept for a future generation, perhaps in the event of a cataclysm that ended the world as they knew it. They might have wanted their secrets to be rediscovered by somebody. So perhaps it might have made sense that they sealed these things up inside the pyramid. And there are some legends coming down from Egypt which give credence to that idea, which are set out in my book. And these shafts might be consistent with that explanation of the pyramid, that perhaps these shafts are conduits to further secret chambers further up inside the pyramid. This is the famous so-called Gantenbrink door that Rudolf Gantenbrink discovered in 1993 with his robot. And as you will know, in 2002, National Geographic sponsored a new robot called the Pyramid Rover, woof woof, which went up the shaft and drilled a hole through this door and inserted a probe with a small camera. And it revealed nothing much of interest, just an empty space about 8 inches cubic. So this shaft is 8 inches square, by the way, and just an 8-inch gap behind it, where it would appear another stone blocks the continuation of the shaft. And as I say, that was in September 2002. Zahi Hawass, good old Zahi, was on TV live to unveil this anticlimax, and he was very strongly assertive that he would build a new robot and examine what lay behind this new door, as he called it. And we've been waiting now for nearly 4 years. Well, I promised you an exclusive on what was happening. What is happening out in Egypt at the moment is there is going to be a run-off competition between 2 robots. There are 2 teams who are bidding to win this new project. One of them is University of Singapore, and the other one, I'm pleased to say, is a British Hong Kong venture. It's being funded from Hong Kong, and they have designed an all-singing, all-dancing robot which can cope with just about any eventuality of what it discovers beyond the new stone. It can drill through it. It can even send down a miniature robot on a ramp from itself to go scurrying and exploring around with a camera to explore in complete depth whatever it finds. So lessons have been learned from the previous robot. The previous robot just sent a little camera through. The camera couldn't even turn around and look at the back of the door. They hadn't really thought through the project. So what we're finding this time is the Egyptian authorities are thinking this through very, very carefully. They're taking their time. They are in no rush. They perceive that the last exploration was an anticlimax. And they want to get this one right. So according to my sources, nothing is going to happen soon. But in October, there will be a run-off competition using a replica of the shafts. There'll be a competition to see which robot is the best suited. According to my sources, the University of Singapore robot has not reared its head on anybody's desk yet, so it may just be at the design stage, in which case the British robot is going to get this job, which is something I'm really looking forward to. When it will happen, when the final exploration will happen, who knows, but we could be looking at the end of this year or the beginning of next year. And hopefully what we might find are 2 secret chambers, which would have to be quite small because they would be no more than about 30 or 40 feet from the outside of the pyramid at each edge. So there's not room for for a really large chamber like this, but perhaps something small. Perhaps my theory is that we might find the sacred writings of the pyramid builders, which I'm hoping will vindicate what I've been arguing about Egyptian religion. Moving on now to other possibilities of secret chambers. So far I have talked about chambers that were secret in the beginning, which we now know about. But now I'd like to talk about some other possibilities for secret chambers which have been neglected and gone unexplored for so many years. And one of these possibilities was mentioned in a book by Piazzi Smythe in 1865. He was particularly interested in the pyramid as a prophecy in stone that unveiled the future, the world wars and so on. It's not a theory that I subscribe to personally, but in his book he was taking very careful note of the joints inside the Great Pyramid. And he pointed out that about 40 feet down from the main entrance to the pyramid, there are some unusual joints here, which are almost upright, whereas the other joints slope with the passageway this way. These joints suddenly turn upright, and immediately beyond these joints is a scored line, a line that's been scored with a heavy implement in the sides of the passageway. And Piazzi Smythe wrote in his book that there were people in his time who believed this might mark the entrance to a secret passageway. He just mentioned this in passing. And that idea was given some weight by a book called The Egyptian Pyramids by a fellow called Lepre in 1990. He said that maybe Piazzi Smythe was onto something, and this was something that needed to be explored. Well, now I'm mentioning it again, but will Egyptologists listen? We have to convince them this pyramid was more than a tomb and nothing but a tomb, and then perhaps they will listen and start to explore some of these obvious signs. And the reason this is such a strong indicator is because if you travel another 55 feet down this passageway, you come to the point I showed you earlier of the secret passageway that leads up to the Queen's Chamber, the King's Chamber, etc. And that secret passageway was hidden by a camouflaging stone in the roof of the passageway. But what I didn't mention to you then, and I'll mention it now, is that in the floor of this passageway, directly underneath that camouflaged stone, was an unusual joint in the floor, as if like a big X marking the spot. And this is something, again, Smythe pointed it out in 1865, Lepre, again in 1990, said, hey, this is really important. It's as if, and this does not sit easily with the tomb theory, the idea that the king was buried in the king's chamber. If that was so, why would he have marked the entrance passageway to his tomb? That doesn't make a lot of sense. That's one of the reasons why I think this pyramid could have been designed as a time capsule and that the chambers were intended to be found. Otherwise, why mark with unusual joints the hidden stone that led to the upper passages and chambers? And this too seems to be a sign for the wise, a sign for the initiated to perhaps dig into the side walls to see whether there are some secret passageways there, and who knows where they might lead. I don't have time to go through all these possibilities today in my lecture, but I'll mention just a couple of the best prospects for discovery. And another one is here in the Queen's Chamber, and this is following the same vein of thought which was proposed by Lepre, a chap called J.P. Lepre. Egyptologists like to be known by their initials, J.P. Lepre. I should be A.F. Alford, shouldn't I? I like to call myself Alan. So I'm only half an Egyptologist, really, so I'm Alan F. Alford. Anyway, J.P. Lepre, claiming to be a real Egyptologist, pointed out that these stones had never been mapped before, and he set out to chart all the measurements of these stones in the passageway leading to the Queen's Chamber. And he found something unusual. He found, again, a very strange arrangement of stones about halfway down this passageway that differed from the other joints in the floor. So he said, again, we have here some kind of mark in the floor. And immediately beyond this strange joint, some very large stones in the floor and the side walls. And he said, here is another place we ought to look for a secret passageway. If there was a secret passageway here, it's most likely to go down. That's my opinion, because if you go up, you come into quite a cluttered part of the pyramid where you've got the Queen's Chamber, the Grand Gallery. Most likely there would be a hidden passageway here that goes down, and that might go down perhaps to the foundation bedrock of the pyramid, which we'll be talking about later. Another interesting possibility, this is one I've come up with. I'm surprised nobody else has spotted this before. This is the Grand Gallery of the Great Pyramid. It's 154 feet long, it's 28 feet high. It's got this corbelling design which we saw earlier in the Queen's Chamber niche, though this may well be for structural relief, whereas the other one is purely symbolic. So we've got this corbelling design, and then we see here at the top, there are 40 roof slabs from top to bottom of this Grand Gallery. The stairs here are a modern addition. This is underneath here is a smooth surface that goes all the way to the top. There are some unusual niches in the side ramps. Nobody knows what they were for. The Grand Gallery is, again, a total mystery. It is almost unique in Egypt. There's a very small, maybe replica or something of it in a very small pyramid. Nothing on this scale or this splendor. So let's call it a unique design. But there are chambers that have some kind of symbolic similarity to it, which I'll show you in a moment. Now take a good look at that picture, put that in your mind, and then compare this corbelling shape to this, which is a picture from the Red Pyramid at Dahshur. According to the official chronology, this pyramid at Dahshur, there are two at Dahshur, the Red Pyramid and the Bent Pyramid. They both have these corbelled chambers similar to this one. In the Red Pyramid, I think there are about 3 chambers that have this kind of design, where the walls gradually close in. Now, study this picture very closely, because what we see is that the corbelling narrows in until eventually, at the top, we get the width of one double corbel. Now, compare that to the Great Pyramid, how the corbelling steps in here, again here, it steps in until at the top, it's closed off by these slabs. Doesn't that make you want to just knock out these roof slabs and see what's above them? It suddenly hit me one day, this is what we should be doing. Don't get me wrong, there is some symmetry in this design. The width here, 3 foot 6 inches, mirrors the width of the sloping passageway in the middle here. So there is some symmetry. Nevertheless, when I compare this to the corbelled chambers in the Red Pyramid and the Bent Pyramid, I can't help but imagine that this corbelled design should actually go higher and higher until eventually it comes to one double corbel at the top. I sat down and did some calculations, and I was amazed at what I found. Let me just mention first of all, at 14 feet height in this Grand Gallery, there are some unusual grooves in the walls. They run from the bottom of the gallery all the way to the top of the gallery, just below one of these corbels. This groove is about 1 inch deep, and it's about 5 inches wide, and it runs a whole 154 feet length. And it's on both sides. And all along these grooves, this is a little known fact about the pyramid, all along these grooves are chisel marks, which indicates that in antiquity something was chiseled out of the grooves. And Lepre, that man again, I highly recommend his book, though it is out of print. Lepre again, he's the man, he said, there must have been something in these grooves that spanned the gallery, going across like this. He suggested some kind of roof made of wood, cedar wood. And I think he might have been right. But isn't it curious that the Egyptians would build this huge gallery and then close off the upper part of it with what I would call a false roof, a false ceiling. It looks as if it had a false ceiling at a height of 14 feet. Anyway, I did the calculations of the corbels coming in to see at what points the corbels would meet in the middle if they went up and up and up. And interestingly enough, they meet at a height of 42 feet. So it's 14 feet from the ground to the first set of grooves, another 14 feet to the 40 roof slabs we know today, and then another 14 feet by my calculation to what ought to be the real height of this gallery. So my message to the Egyptologists is, let's remove one or two of these roof slabs and see what we find above them. Or let's poke a probe up there. This is a part of the pyramid that has never been studied. Some maintenance work has been done to regrout them, repair and insert metal inserts to make sure they don't fall down, but perhaps we should be looking above them. For the final part of my presentation, I want to bring you down to the second hidden entrance we saw at the beginning. In the descending passageway, there is another secret entrance to a shaft which today is called the well shaft, so named because the Arabs, when they looked down, saw it as a steep well that descended into the underworld. We know today that this so-called well shaft goes, first of all, sideways into the masonry, and then comes all the way up to a small cave which lies just below ground level. It is believed that there is a kind of mound of bedrock on which the pyramid is anchored at this point. And the grotto is some...
Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Final round. Fight! You win! Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight. You lose. Round one. Fight. Round two. Fight. You win. Round one. Fight. Round two. Fight. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Final round. Fight! You win! It's go time!